Photography is how I work, everything in photography, but mainly I make books, handmade books. Sequencing and arrangement of images is very, very important. I like single photographs. Single photographs are obviously what you try to get to, but for me, the real art and the real skill of what I do is taking 45 to 50 pictures and sequencing them in a way that they tell a story. I'm a storyteller, that's what I do. I love storytelling. And so I take documentary photographs, but then I arrange them in a way that turns them into something else, another sort of story or another idea. I love the still image, like that still, there is a moment that you capture that is still a split second. And when you take that, it's like in moments in films where you see a particular sequence, you really only remember that one little piece, and that's what I like about photography. It's like it sits in your memory as a single image, but then when it's sequenced with other images, it becomes even more powerful. Everything I do is film-based, so I really haven't explored too much the digital world. I love film, it's always been a sort of a process for me. It's a meditative process. I process every single roll myself, in the black and white, that is. And I use a very long development time, so it takes a long time to do. So that's sort of the time. It's like shaking a tank for an hour. And that's kind of when I think as well, that this is just the zone that I get into. And I also work on projects that last an incredible amount of time. Some can be 5, 10-year projects. So I find that with film, it hasn't changed in that period where digital has just gone berserk. So everything has a continuity to it. I live in the moment of right this second. Right this moment is important to me. And what's usually affecting me in my life at this moment, I try and then put through into my images and photographs. So Australia has always been is my country, and it's where I photograph, and it's where I have a real passion and love for the culture and the people. And so that's very important to me, and where I grew up in Newcastle on the East Coast. All those things come about in a way that helps me tell life stories. And so it's just, I can't go to another country and be there for 2 or 3 weeks and try and make an important body of work. It just doesn't happen that way. My work is, yes, I'm living in this moment, but it's very much to do with the past and where I've come from that then becomes part of the photograph in whatever body of work I'm making. I'm definitely not political, but there is a point where a political element sometimes comes out in my work. Minutes to Midnight was a trip that we did around Australia in 2003-04, and it was at a point when there was a newspaper article said that 60% of Australians thought that the country had lost its so-called innocence. And so I sort of took that, and I've always wanted to do the big road trip around Australia, and I sort of took that and thought, right, this is the time. And so what I wanted to do when I was going around was just fly by the seat of my pants, nothing arranged, but just go out and actually see what was happening in the country. And at that time we'd had, there was the September 11, this is just after this, they had the Bali bombings, they had the worst firestorms in the country, the worst droughts. There was this sort of terrible thing where a lot of the long-running events in the little country communities couldn't actually function anymore because of the high insurance premiums. There was all these sorts of things that there was this sense that the world had changed. And so what I do is I try and show it in an emotional way, not physically what the country looks like, but what it feels emotionally to be living right now in this period of our life. And whether that comes out as a political statement or not, that's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm just trying to do is show you what it was like to live when I was alive and what I was seeing, and that's important to me. For me, it's all about chance, coincidence, mistakes. I love mistakes. And photography allows me, it's that moment when I still pull those films out of the tank and hold them up and look at those images, and you just never know. If I know what's on those images, I'm not interested in almost processing. I've got thousands of rolls that are just shoved aside because there was no mystery, there was no extra element that had come into the picture. I know that. So they just pushed aside. It's the ones where you pull them out and go, look at that. Life, chance, all these elements come together for a split second and have then created, and the process of chemicals on film, all of those ideas, and all of a sudden something unique is there that presents itself. And a lot of the time I'll also see something and go, on the negative, while I'm going through the negatives, go, there's a tiny little thing like, wow, how did that happen? And then I'll go back over and try and recreate that in a bigger picture, or until I've exhausted the possibility of that small little discovery. It's all about discovery for me, and making those things that change your perception of where you're going with the next body of work. There's a shot that I took called Moving Bus, and it was again something I saw on the negative, a tiny little piece of the negative, and I was doing very slow time exposures in Sydney, on the streets of Sydney, and I originally was very much a street photographer. I walk the streets, wait for the little patches of light. I'd stand on a corner, have my spots in Sydney where I would stand knowing that the light would be there for 10 minutes at this point, and then I would move on to the next place, the next place, and the next place, because that's where the light would be. But it's always waiting for that moment then to present itself. But there's a picture that I spent for Moving Bus, and I saw this part of this image on this negative. I then went back every day for 3 months until I got this particular picture, until I'd exhausted every possible option, but I got the big picture that I was after, that I could never see being replicated again. And it all came down to a moment with many sort of facets and many sorts of things going on in the image that all come together for that one split second and gone forever. I love life, absolutely love life. And there was a point that for me that changed everything. That was when I was quite young. I was about 13. My mum died of an asthma attack, and I was the only one home with her at the time. It was very sudden. My dad was at his squash night, and it was just absolutely, as a 13-year-old kid, after that you question everything, every single thing that's going on around you. It's about life. Why am I here? Question everything. And so that, I think, started me off. Mum had a small dark room, and she had she took pictures and would send them into the local paper. So I picked up her camera and started taking pictures. First started on the newspaper as a way of earning some money, and I'd sort of seen those sort of classic pictures like Duarsneo Kiss, and for some reason I gravitated towards that style of work. And so I thought the newspaper was the place to get those sort of pictures. So I eventually started the newspaper, but I was playing professional cricket at the time as well, as a cricketer. So I had to make a choice, and I got a job on one of the major Sydney newspapers. So I had to make a choice between playing professionally or working as a photographer. In the end, I chose photography, but as a result, I then became the sports photographer and the first sports photographer for the Australian newspaper. So I then would walk the streets for that 10 years in Sydney period. I walked the streets every day capturing life, because it wasn't quite what I wanted. But what happened was, working as a sports photographer enhanced everything of shooting on the streets and in other situations, because photography it's about anticipation. It's about being there before the actual photograph takes place. And so you learn to do that in sport, and so it gave me a great sort of help to then move to the next place in what I do in art photography. There's all these things after many years of training in different fields that has now reached the final sort of product, I guess. When we travelled around Australia, I took my tanks and I would hang my films on clotheslines. In every caravan park that we went to, I had a little scanner that I could then just quickly see. It's important that once I sort of, you have this, usually when I start a project, I'll shoot for 3 or 4 weeks and shoot manically, and then I'll arrange them on the wall or in my tent. I'll print out little tiny pictures that I can start looking at. And subconsciously, without you knowing it, this is what I love about photography, that things that have influenced your life when you're growing up, they come through in other ways. And so what I'm fascinated is what I am drawn to actually take the picture, why I've seen that particular thing and press the button. My wife's a photographer as well. We can walk down the same street with our Leicas, whatever, and photograph, and we will come back with completely different things. Why are you drawn to that particular thing? And usually it is something that has influenced your life as in your time growing up, and that's what's special to me about photography. It's a part of me that you're getting with my pictures. I think the first picture I ever shot was like walking out of the dark, out of the little laundry that we had, and my feet were all wet, and the footprints were there, and then they were gone. And so I photographed, and that's about photography as well. It's grabbing hold of something and not wanting to let go. And I suppose that sort of harks back to Mum as well, and holding on to something, that piece of life before it disappears. And I don't think so. No, everything I've photographed, if I look back on my whole since that point, which I've never stopped photographing, it's always there. And as I said, I photograph how my life is at this current time, what's influencing. So if I look back, I can see your whole life pretty much in photographs, and it hasn't changed that much really. It's still about discovering and imagination. It's always about imagination. Imagination's the key to everything. I'm a self-taught photographer. I've learned everything myself. I got books to start off with, but then it's really about making those discoveries by processing and having the disasters. And as I said, a lot of the time mistakes will lead to something else. So I think it's very important that you just continue to shoot and shoot and shoot and develop and you work it out for yourself. I love all aspects of it. I love, I was obviously, as so many photographers in a previous gone era, it was when that image came up in the tray, that you first see it. This is magic. This is absolute magic. How does this happen? And at that point in my life, I needed some magic, and there it was. And so it's never really stopped from that point on. I love the process of taking the picture, of waiting for the image to come together. I love the process of it coming out of the actual tank and seeing that negative for the first time, and then printing it in the darkroom or scanning. As soon as it comes up, it's a different thing once it comes up on a piece of paper or on the computer screen. The whole process for me is my life. I don't know what I'd do without it. All of it, for me, is the one thing. There's no farming out anywhere. As I said, I process every roll. I hand make every book. I print every photograph. It's all part of the process, yeah. I was in Sydney on the East Coast for quite a lot of my life and career, but coming to Adelaide over sort of 6 years ago, I used to travel with the Australian cricket team for about 4 or 5 years, I think it was. And every time we'd come to Adelaide, you'd see this incredible light. The light is just amazing. So I really wanted to come here at some stage. Then, as it turned out, I met my wife, who was from Adelaide, and we ended up living here. But the light in Adelaide it's like nowhere else in the world. I've found it so sharp, and it's so Australian. And you have no hills. It goes all on where the sun goes down. You have it all the way down over the water, so it streams down these big, wide open Adelaide streets. And that's always been my inspiration as well. Light. I don't set anything up when it comes to my photographs. Everything is a sort of a natural occurrence. And there's one photograph in the awards of a Aboriginal woman with a white baby, and I'll never forget. I was walking down this very desolate street in outback West Australia and saw this scene. And I don't ever usually actually approach anyone and say, "Can I take a picture?" But this was just too amazing to. And there was this incredible late afternoon light, and this white baby was just glowing, and it's one of those things where. I took the picture, but just as I was about to take the picture, the only cloud in the sky came across and it blanked out the sun, and behind was this amazing storm. The scene was just amazing. And I remember having that thing of going up and saying, "Look, can I just quickly take this picture?" And she was like, "Yeah, sure." It was a very unusual scene to see in Australia. And just as I was about to take this picture, the cloud blanked it out and it was gone for the rest of the day. And I was so shattered that I took the picture and I put it away and I never looked at it because I was just devastated from what I saw with the light. And it's only this year that I was going back looking through my negatives for something else, that I found this picture and actually revisited this 10 years later and printed this picture. And it came out, and I just never forget going, what was I thinking? But I was so shattered that the light had gone. But it was actually, in a way, I think it was better because the softness of the image was there and the detail in the face. But I was after a very specific thing when I was shooting that work, the minutes to midnight, which was, I was looking for this very hard light. So that was the zone I was in. And that's one of the beauties, I think, of film, is that 10 years later, I can go back, there it is, it hasn't changed, there's the image, and it's better than I could possibly imagine. I'm absolutely competitive with myself in pushing myself. I never stop. I never stop trying to get to that next place and see if I can be the best that I can be with where I've come from in my life. I come from, I come from a suburban street in Newcastle that's miles away in the bush, to being a photographer now, a Magnum photographer and so forth. It's always about pushing yourself to the next level, seeing how far, making sure that you can get the best out of who you are, for sure.